Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Scott Minger to talk about partnerships. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, as I tend to ask my guests as their first question, what is your superhero origin story?
Well, my background before getting into nonprofit was corporate retail. I worked for the Walgreens company for 13 years, a good portion of that as the category manager for vitamins and nutrition at Walgreens, and loved what I did. Loved the working for Walgreens. And over the years, corporate was an area that I had a passion for in retail and being a merchant and all the fun things that come along with that. But I was looking for something that was a little more purpose driven. While I was working at Walgreens, we made the connection with Vitamin Angels and wanted to partner with Vitamin Angels, really kind of as a strategy as of having a point of difference versus our competition, and having a compelling reason as to why you would turn left into Walgreens instead of right into CVS or one of our other competitors. And really, as I started working with Vitamin Angels, just fell in love with the organization, fell in love with the work that they were doing. They were doing great work, but they were kind of hitting a ceiling a bit, and we're looking for more support from corporations like a Walgreens to scale up the impact that they were having. And as I began to get a great understanding of how they showed up, how they supported corporate partners, I really saw an opportunity to take my retail background and working with brands to a nonprofit to really scale up the reach and impact that they were having. And so I got the great opportunity to join Vitamin Angels early on. My focus was really trying to secure Walgreens to a long-term commitment to build out and professionalize the way that we show up with corporate partners and brands. And, how do we take the work that we do in development to a whole new level? And so in November 2013, I left Walgreens, I joined Vitamin Angels, and I've been at Vitamin Angels for 12 years now.
Awesome. And just for the people who are outside of the US, Walgreens and CVS are pharmacies, just so you know.
Yes, correct.
So it's been 12, 13 years with the Vitamin Angels. And what is your role there today?
Today, I'm the Chief Development Officer for Vitamin Angels, with a big focus on corporate partners. We also do raise funds through foundations and individuals as well. But we feel that one of the strengths that we have as a big part of our revenue portfolio is unrestricted funding, right? And so a lot of the work that I'm doing is working with my team to really go after those unrestricted revenue opportunities by working with companies that have a passion for, you know, women's and maternal health and children's health and nutrition. Really kind of, we like to talk about bringing their vision and mission to life, right? That give us those opportunities to invest in the areas that have the highest need, versus kind of being restricted and having to spend the money in certain countries or certain programs. It really does give us the ability to manage our programs in the way that we see fit, right? And that's a big reason, we've been able to scale up. So when I first started with Vitamin Angels, we're reaching about 25 million women and children, right? 12 years later, we're now reaching 74 million women and children in over 60 countries. So that freedom of unrestricted funding is a huge part of why we've been able to do that.
That is an impressive amount of growth. I'm curious to know, is that really the key? Is that unrestricted funding? Because that to me is the golden goose, or the holy grail. I don't get the exact expression for it, but I think most organizations would love to have unrestricted funding to be able to do, where they deem the urge or the need is most urgent. I was curious to know, how did you position yourself, or how did you be able to solicit all that unrestricted funding? Like, what was the main motivation or the main convincing factor for you to say, like, give us this unrestricted funding because we know where we need to place it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that really are important. I think, having very authentic programs and stories and being able to demonstrate your credibility, right? That you know how to scale up, right? That you can provide and demonstrate where that growth is coming from and where it's going, right? That you're fiscally responsible. So, we've got the highest rating on Charity Navigator. We're top 3% of charities. We've had over 12 years of 4-star ratings, right, consecutively. And so I think the really important piece as it pertains to being able to achieve restricted funding is being able to demonstrate your fiscal responsibility, right? And it's something that we feel passionately about, is that if a company is going to donate to us, that we have a responsibility to spend that money in the right manner that's going to lead to reaching and impacting more women and children, right? So, if you look at our total revenue, over 90% of what we raise in total revenue goes towards program costs, right? So having a really strong fiscal responsibility policy that you can demonstrate is critical to that. I also think having very authentic storytelling and being able to demonstrate the costs and what the impact is really important as well, right? And unfortunately, I think at times, there's restrictions that get put on funding more for the idea of being able to talk about specific messages, right? Like, I want to be able to talk about how I'm supporting women and children in the United States, or I want to talk about how, we're supporting work that's being done in Indonesia, right? Because I've got operations in Indonesia and I want to be able to talk about local impact. And that's more marketing than it is the need to restrict funds, right? And I know this is a big topic that nonprofits in general are always having to deal with and try to figure out.
So, authentic stories, fiscal responsibilities. Can you tell me maybe a little more about? We'll go through each one. Like, authentic stories. What does that really mean to you? How do you communicate a story in an authentic way so that it really resonates with these potential partners?
Yeah, so I think two things that are really important is being able to track progress, right? So one of the things that we do with our partners that we're really proud of is tracking milestones, right? So the average cost of a nutritional intervention for Vitamin Angels is 25 cents. And what that does is it really allows us to track progress that's being made based on the level of commitment that we've gotten, right? And so, I think a great example of this would be our partnership with Walgreens, right? Where we've reached half a billion women and children over the lifetime of that partnership. We've been partnered for 12 years and have had a ton of success. What that allows us to do is really engage employees on the impact that their company is having, right? And what those milestones are, what those really kind of defining what the success is, how the world's different because of the commitment that they've made, right? And that's what's driving, those moments of inspiration and emotion. And a lot of our partners, have said to us that they leverage the partnership, they leverage these milestones as a way to attract and retain top talent. I was just talking to a partner the other day that brought on a new executive, and the feedback we got was, the reason he chose to work with this company was because of the partnership with Vitamin Angels, right? And so that's part of the authentic story. And then also, how do you tell the story of what the impact is really having on the lives on the ground, right? How do you tell the story of what's changed, right? How children are able to thrive when they receive the essential nutrition that's so critical, right? How do you tell a story about healthy pregnancy outcomes that are coming about, right? Because of our prenatal program, right? And we hear stories, about women that have had children without prenatal vitamins, and we hear, the same woman that has had another child with prenatal vitamins, and really being able to see the impact of that. So it's kind of bringing the story and impact that we're having through our partnership in a very authentic way.
I'm curious to know the medium that you're using to communicate these stories. Is it a conversation you're sitting down and around a table? Is it a pamphlet or a video that has been recorded? Like, how do you actually communicate these stories to potential partners?
Yeah, we use different mediums, right? So it's certainly there's a verbal communication when we're in meetings that we're sharing with our champions that we're working with. We create social media assets that help tell the story. We create videos, right? And it and at its core, what I believe, what my team believes, is at the end of the day, we have a responsibility with the investment we're getting to add value back to our partners, right? And so part of what we do is how do we leverage our storytelling capabilities to help achieve, what business objectives they're looking for out of the partnership, right? And very often it's things like, I want to be able to engage my employees, give them that moment of inspiration to be proud about the company they're working for, right? I want to strengthen my relationships with my retailers. I want to have a point of difference with consumers, right? I want to make that emotional connection. So very often, our partners are donating based on kind of their overall business, right? So we like to talk about how it's empowering, the partnership is empowering the consumer when they shop their products, right? And so, it's a core responsibility. We put our partners' businesses objectives, what they're trying to do, is top priority, right? Um, and, that doesn't mean anybody gets to, dictate how we do our work, right? But, you know, doing good and conducting good business could be accomplished at the same time, right? And that's really kind of what we're focused on.
The second point you mentioned was fiscal responsibility. And this is, I'm curious to know, has there been a situation where you have two partners or one potential partner, one existing partner that have conflicting goals? And it's, obviously it's impossible to, in this case, to solve for both of them. Like, is there correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that if there's too many conflicting goals, you can't please everybody. You might say no to this potential partner. But is there another way forward? Is there a way, a happy medium where you can do some compromising or saying to this new partner, new potential partner, okay, you guys have different goals and what we're aiming for, we can achieve them, but be aware that there are other partners that we have that have a conflicting goal. Like, I'm just curious to know how you manage conflict between partners and the goals of those partners.
Yeah, at the end of the day, that is part of, the work that we do, right? And so, um, I would say we strive really hard not to be all things to all people, right? And so we're looking for long-term strategic sustainable partnerships, right? And so one of the biggest challenges for a nonprofit is the spikes in revenue, right? And so I think it's great if you get a big donor that can come on, right? But what is super critical for the health of a nonprofit is predictability and ability to be accurate with your revenue forecast, right? So because of that, we're really trying to build strategic partnerships that as much as we can kind of avoid that conflict, right? That being said, you're always going to have multiple partners that sell multivitamins, right? We have multiple partners that sell fish oil, right? You're always going to have that kind of duplication of types of categories that partners may be in, right? But it's really on us to make sure that each partnership feels unique and different, right? And so when you have two partners that may be in the same type of business, right? It's really what our team does is to make sure that each partner feels that their partnership and the way that they show up with Vitamin Angels feels unique and different, right? And I think that's part of our secret sauce is our ability to really kind of be business consultants, if you will, right? The idea of like, we know what works, we know what doesn't work. We have a great sense of how we can make a partnership look different and unique and how they show up to consumers, how they show up internally with stakeholders. And that's a really important piece because if you can't make those partnerships feel unique and different, they're not going to be, they're not going to last very long. Right. And again, going back to the desire to have long-term sustainable partnerships, that's a key piece of how you accomplish that.
I imagine then you have some kind of key considerations for knowing whether you should partner with an organization or not. Like, is there some kind of major checklist, or at least the major points in that checklist where you have to make sure these things are checked off before you agree to have a partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a donor policy that details the types of companies that we can't work with, right? And um, we always have the guardrails that our partners can't dictate or try to drive the work that we're doing, right? So we absolutely kind of separate those two, and so I think it's really important to have the checklist to your point, um, but also being transparent about it, right?
Mm.
And there are times where we may have a company interested in partnering with us, but due to various reasons, it just isn't a fit for us, right? And the piece that we guard very hard is our credibility within the public health space, right? So we're a public health organization, we're an evidence-based organization, and we can't afford to take any type of hit from a credibility perspective based on the types of companies we work with, right? So that's always a critical piece as we're evaluating new
Hey,
partnerships.
Alex here. I want to take a brief moment and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, please consider sharing it with someone who would also benefit from its insights. It's these kinds of referrals that really help the show grow. You can also show your support by making a small donation. I don't do corporate sponsorships or product placements, so I rely on your support to keep the show going. You can visit my website, agentsofnonprofit.com, and click Support Us in the top menu. Thank you kindly.
During your growth, this 25, 24 to 74 million, any particular major moves that were done? I mean, aside from just growing partnerships, are there any other considerations or any other moves that you made that really moved the needle forward?
Yeah, I think, scaling up our NGO network, our nonprofit network. So the way that we work is we're not building our own infrastructure in these various countries that we work in. Everything we do is a very sustainable model. So we're working with local NGOs that are in the communities that we're wanting to get into. We provide them with the product, the technical assistance, right? And really investing locally versus going into a country and building our own infrastructure, if you will, right? So that strategy really is what has enabled us to scale up in such a big way. I think landing a couple really big strategic partnerships that has given us that much needed revenue in order to build that infrastructure and scale up has been super critical. If I'm thinking about our partnership with Walgreens, is what has taken us to a whole new level. Smarty Pants, Bear, right? So there's key partners that we've had that have been with us for a very long time that has given us that ability to invest in the areas that has resulted in that increased outreach or increased impact, if you will, which has been really critical. And I think from a development perspective, where we've grown is really that ability to be a business partner to the companies that we work with, right? And so the key, in my mind, the key to long-term sustainable partnerships is being able to deliver on business value, right? And every company is going to describe the value that they're getting out of the partnership differently, right? Some, again, may be about employee engagement. Some may be about increasing sales by having a point of difference. Some may be about strengthening relationships with the retailers, right? Every company is going to look at what they want to get out of that partnership differently, and it'll change throughout the cycle of that partnership, right? So the ability to provide business value, the ability to pivot when their strategy changes is super critical to the longevity of that partnership. That is what has allowed us to be able to really scale up in a way because of that unrestricted revenue, and be able to grow that over the years is what allowed us to go from 25 million to 74 million.
And as your partners are joining you for this journey, is there, I imagine there's all kinds of feedback loops, making sure that they are aware of the impact that they're having. You mentioned that a bit earlier as well. Are there any specific tactics that you use to be able to share that story? Like if there's a, moment where they donate or contribute a large amount of money, you're able to use that money in a very positive way. How do you collect the story or build the story and then share it back with them and then do that over the course of your partnership?
Yeah, I think it gets back to being able to demonstrate the reach that you've had through the partnership, right? And that goes back to the milestone celebrations that we were talking about, right? So how are we progressing in terms of reach? And then also being able to demonstrate what the impact of that reach has been, right? And that authentic storytelling is really important. And we like to talk about how we're bringing our partners along the journey as we're doing the work that we're doing, right? And all that is driving credibility back into the partnership, right? And so I believe that the credibility that you build with your partners is what allows you, when you may have a challenge in the partnership, right? Think about it as a checking account, right? You're depositing credibility for those times where there may be a challenge that you have to address, right? And so that builds trust, right? And you got to start with building and adding business value. Business value creates trust. Trust creates loyalty, right? And so we think about this as like a journey, right? And so with our new partners, we're really focused on, okay, what is the objectives that you want to achieve in this partnership? Where can we add value? Where are your pain points, right? I like to describe ourselves as, problem solvers. What can we do together and collaborate on how we may be able to adjust or not adjust, but address some of the challenges that you're having, right? And if we can add business value, that business value is going to result in trust. And when we build trust with our partners, that is what drives longevity, right? If you can't build trust, your partnerships aren't going to last very long.
Mhm. You spoke of reach and impact of reach. So this sounds very data driven, which is awesome. I'm curious to know what kind of emotional impact are you trying to achieve as well, if any? Like, is there a balance between creating emotions through the story and just the data that, here is the facts, A, B, C, D? Like, what would be the balance between the two, if any?
Yeah, I think they're equally important, right? And so, there are data points that we provide our partners with that demonstrate both the reach that we're having, and there's a lot of work that we're doing to be able to demonstrate what the impact is, right? And so, when you only talk about reach, you're only telling half the story, right? So that's great. We reached 74 million women and children, but what was the result? Right. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing in collaboration with our programs team to really be able to even expand upon, what the result of that impact is, right? Or what the result of that reach is. But you have to couple that with authentic storytelling to bring that to life, right? Um, just seeing data points on a slide can be emotional, right? But it just takes it to a whole new level when you can couple that with real world stories, stories of impact that are coming from our programs team, coming from our program partners locally that we can then take and really kind of feed into our partnerships.
The third part that I often hear about, so there's the emotional side, there's the data-driven side. Sometimes people like to add a bit of urgency as well to their story, to their messaging. Do you guys do that? And if so, how?
Yeah, we do. We like to talk about, we want our communication to be, emotional, invoke empathy, and create urgency, right? Those are the three kind of big pillars of what we're trying to do when we communicate about our work, right? And so, we'll communicate urgency based on, the overall need, right? People globally suffering from malnutrition, right? And both globally and in the United States, what that need is, the challenges that we're facing, right? There's a lot of the challenges that the world's facing right now, whether it be climate change, whether it be policy change, right? And at the end of the day, that's what helps us kind of create that sense of urgency, if you will, right? Which I think is important. Is important because urgency can evoke emotion, right, and evoke ownership and wanting to get involved.
In a previous conversation, you told me that it's not really that companies make an impact, it's that people do. And I'm curious to know, like, well, as you're building a relationship and a partnership or a relationship with a partner, are you building it with specific people within the company typically? Are there, main roles or profiles that you look for to be able to create that relationship? Or you just take it, like, I'm just curious to know your approach on how to build personal relationships within organizations or within partners.
Yeah, so it's a strong belief that I have that at the end of the day, companies aren't changing the world. It's the people within companies that are, right? And so we can't do the work that we need to do without building those relationships and building champions within the companies, right? So at the end of the day, every partnership we have, the company, the entity isn't the one making the decision. It's a real person in a real role that's making the decision to say, okay, yes, we want to partner with Vitamin Angels. And then even more than that, it's very often those champions that we have internally that are helping us grow the partnership and sustain it long term, right? And so, what we're always trying to do with our partnerships is identify key champions and then work our way up through an organization. So very often, we may start the discussion about a partnership with somebody in sales or marketing or a buyer, right? But then we also want to try to influence our way up the chain, so to speak, to increase our influence internally, right? And so very often we're working and partnering with multiple people, multiple teams within an organization with the idea of adding business value back to that partnership, right? And so being able to cultivate champions, being able to cultivate replacement champions, so to speak, right? So in the environment we're in today, very often we may lose our champion internally. They may retire, they may take a job with another company, right? And so the ability to be able to find that replacement champion and cultivate that relationship is really important, which is another reason why we try to get as sticky as possible internally with our partnerships, right? And be able to work with as many different teams as we possibly can. And there's a part of that is important for Vitamin Angels, but I think the big piece of that is just trying to add as much business value as we can to our partners, right? And leverage the investment that they're making in the biggest way possible.
I'm curious if you have some advice for organizations that are trying to emulate your success in terms specifically of because I know that the current economy is in a weird state, let's call it. So I believe that there are more partnerships, like people are more organizations, more nonprofit organizations are reaching out to corporate sponsorships and other kinds of partnerships as an alternative source of revenue. And I'm curious to know if you have any advice for those, because I'm sure there are more and more proposals being sent out to partners. What would be your advice for standing out among this, sea of proposals?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really important, and I can understand nonprofits wanting to go after corporate, and I think what's really important is understanding, are you prepared to take that on, right? And having a really clear understanding of what a corporate partner is going to look for in a partnership, and can you deliver against that, right? And so the landscape of corporate partnerships has gotten to a point where there's so many companies reaching out. Ability to add value back into a partnership is really kind of mission critical, right? And so I think having the ability to really understand their business, right? And understand what they're looking for, right? And more importantly, being able to provide solutions against those objectives and those pain points they're trying to address is going to be really important to garner their attention, right? And so, having a really key understanding of their business and what they're trying to achieve is what's going to result in your ability to achieve those types of partnerships.
Any particular trends that you are seeing in the past, couple of months, and if you had, slightly a crystal ball to look into the future, any things that you like? I'm always curious about AI and how AI impacts various elements of the nonprofit world. I'm just curious to see if you have any thoughts about certain trends that are exciting to you.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, there's more technology today than ever to kind of empower nonprofits to be able to make those connections, to get an understanding of trends and identify strategies to be able to attract funders and donors. Um, I think the landscape is more competitive now than it ever has been before, right? And uh, generally speaking, I think companies are becoming more sophisticated in what their asks are and what they're trying to achieve out of a partnership, right? And so I think what's going to be critical, in the future is a nonprofit's ability to kind of rise up and meet those objectives, right? And even in my 12 years at Vitamin Angels, right, what I was being asked to do and support in a partnership, 10 years ago is drastically different than what I'm being asked to do today, right? And as companies become more sophisticated and having a greater understanding of what it is that they want out of a uh, nonprofit partnership, our ability to really kind of be strategic and nimble to meet those objectives is going to be critical for that long-term sustainable growth.
I also love asking one of the final questions about leaning into the superhero theme of things. That if you had a magic wand or a superpower to be able to change something in the partnership space, what would it be?
It's a really good question. I think if I had a superpower, if I had a wish, right, it would be in some form or fashion to have companies kind of self-identify, raise their hands, so to speak, that are looking and actively looking for nonprofit partnerships, right? To be able to, identify companies, that are looking for the types of things that we could deliver against, right? So much of the work that we do is the research, identifying companies that we think we can add value back to, that we think there's mission alignment and their vision priorities align with what we're trying to do. right? And then you layer on, once you have that information, the amount of work that goes in just trying to connect with those companies. And then once you connect with those companies, try to identify, are they even open to a nonprofit partnership? And if they are, do we fit the profile of the type of organization they're looking for, right? So if I had a superpower, it'd be to simplify that ability to connect with relevant companies that fit and we have alignment with.
Love it. Scott, thank you so much. It's great to learn about and to see, organizations still being very successful in this day and age. So I'm happy you were able to share part of your story. If people want to get in touch with you online, how would they be able to do that?
Yeah, easiest way would be through LinkedIn, Scott Minger. Send me a message, send me a connection request. Happy to connect and help any way I can.
Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
You're more than welcome. All right. That's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.